Today we're reading Acts 17, verses 22 through 34. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. Neither is worship with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. And hath made of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed to the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is likened to gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. In the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth every man everywhere to repent. Because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness, by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, and that he hath raised him from the dead. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, and others said, We will hear thee again of this matter. So Paul departed from among them. Howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed, among the which was Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Since the local philosophers had invited Paul to speak at the Areopagus, there on Mars Hill, he was more than happy to accept the opportunity. He begins immediately by addressing their idolatry and the number of gods they believed in. The word superstitious there doesn't mean the same thing as it does to us today. Paul is there pointing out that they are actually too religious. They worship too many gods. And he is accurate. In fact, they were so worried that they may have missed paying honor to a deity somewhere that they had erected an altar addressed to the unknown God. Paul capitalizes on that to address their culture and open their minds towards the fact that the God he was going to tell them about could have easily been missed in their previous search for truth. Paul goes on to describe God as the Creator and as one who is too big to be contained in any temple. He also points out that God doesn't need man to do anything for him. He is instead the God that giveth everything life and created all of us as one human race. He also points out that God created us to seek him. We all have an innate desire to know our Creator. That comes from God himself. In verse 29, he challenges their idolatry by pointing out that we shouldn't think of God like gold, silver, or stone-graven images created by man. In verse 30, Paul points out how that God had for a time overlooked or winked at mankind's ignorance of him. But now that Jesus had come, we all have a choice to make. We can either pay for our own sins, or we can take his righteousness as offered by Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Unfortunately for some, discussion of resurrection was just too much for them to believe. It says some even mocked the idea. Others seemed interested and wanted to hear more, but needed time to think about it. And the last verse shows that Paul's sermon didn't fall entirely on deaf ears. Several believed and began following Paul as disciples. You know, too many times people reject God with vast intellectual arguments. Others dismiss him without even really hearing what his word says. But here, Paul shows that yes, while accepting Christ ultimately falls to faith, the explanation of how God has interacted with his creation from the beginning, even to now, points to Jesus' claim being real. Are you putting up barriers to receiving Christ? He's already done all the work to have a relationship with you. All you have to do is accept it.